Hey everyone, I'm excited to once again bring you a really inspiring success story. And today I want you to all to meet Ellen. Ellen and I worked together over the last couple of months, and I have a feeling that a lot of you are going to find Ellen's story really inspiring and hopeful because Ellen was dealing with a situation of tinnitus that I think a lot of you are going to relate to. Uh, on a multiple different levels, actually. For starters, this was not the first time that Ellen dealt with tinnitus. She had dealt with it about 5 years earlier and
Mhm.
was able to habituate slowly over a long period of time, only to have a recurrence this past year that was much, much more significant and felt very different and much more scary. But also, Ellen's tinnitus started as the result of both occurrences actually started as the result of a side effect of either a medication or a medical procedure. And I know this is another really common thing that a lot of you out there are dealing with, where you get some sort of medical treatment or have some sort of surgery or procedure where you think you're solving a problem only to have this other problem start. And what oftentimes was meant to be like a very positive thing turns into a very negative thing. And then thirdly, because Ellen's work required her to be in a highly triggering environment that was making the situation worse. And yet she had this responsibility to the people that she cared for and had to show up for work. And so you get into this like state of tension. So we'll get into all that today. Ellen, first of all, thank you so much for being here with
Sure.
us today and sharing your story. For starters, why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about let's actually start with like the most recent bout that you had that I helped you with, and kind of paint a picture of kind of how dark things got, and what your quality of life was like, what the tinnitus was like. Because I remember when we first met, I think you hadn't barely slept in like 4 days, and
hmm
were kind of a mess and had fallen apart. So maybe just kind of tell a little bit of that story of like what it was like and what happened in this time around.
Sure. So what I believe it started from was I got the high dose flu vaccine, and within 24 hours, I had ringing in my ears that was different than I had had previously. It was a high pitched, almost like police siren whistles in both ears. And no matter what I did, it would not go away. I couldn't sleep. I was up for literally almost 4 days, and it was relentless. There was nothing I could do to make it go away. I was at wit's end. So I found Glenn through media through email, and contacted him, and he got in touch with me right away. So
And this time around too, I know you had tinnitus back in
Mhm.
2021 as well. When that tinnitus happened, maybe it's worth going backwards for a moment.
Yeah,
I know that this was once again the side effect of a medical procedure. You had a procedure on your face, and
yeah,
that procedure went wrong, and that resulted in like 6 to 12 months of like severe facial pain, like facial
yes,
neuralgia. And
yes.
in that period of like really intense chronic pain was when you first started to experience tinnitus. And obviously, when you're in constant severe pain, that's generally going to be the more salient symptom. That's going to be the thing that grabs your attention and causes distress. I know it wasn't until after the pain started to subside and that problem got better, that the tinnitus became a problem. So what was the tinnitus like back then? I know it wasn't as bad. It wasn't as bad as this time around when it was like these police sirens in your head. But was it bad then, like without knowing what it was going to be like later? Was it a struggle back then
Sure.
as well?
Sure. Not having this to compare it to, I thought it was horrible then. But I went to the ENT doctor and was fitted with through an audiologist, fitted with maskers, which I used, and I will say that worked. It would distract me enough where I could move on, and gradually I habituated that way, I believe. I don't know if it never went away, but it was never um, the intensity that it was that I experienced this round.
Sure.
So,
And I think, not being able to kind of clearly remember exactly how the relief unfolded is actually very
Right.
common. Like when people have habituated with like TRT or just naturally over time, that's I always hear that from people. It's like, yeah, I don't
Right.
know, at some point it just like I know I was feeling better and then I guess at some point it stopped bothering me. I'm not really sure
Right.
when, but didn't go away, but like it kind of went in the background. Not having like a clear sense of things is usually what a sign of just habituation occurred, right? And then you
Yeah.
went many years of feeling fine
Feeling fine.
until this time around where you have this adverse response from the high dose flu vaccine,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, like you're right back starting over again. I know they gave you this time around, they gave you like some steroids, thinking like, well,
I
maybe
did.
something inflammatory is happening, and I think you tolerated it well, but I'm sure that probably exacerbated the sleep issue to some degree.
It
Um,
did.
and also, I think now it's worth mentioning like what you do. So Ellen is a dentist,
Hmm.
and when as people with tinnitus struggle to go to the dentist, like this is something
Hmm.
I'm often coaching people on. Like how do you approach that situation where there's tools being used, where
Hmm.
drills and ultrasonic tools and like create these like really high pitched kind of triggering noises. And when you're being worked on, you're hearing those noises via bone conduction. Like it's going straight to the
Hmm.
inner ear, through the bones, through your teeth, straight through the jawbone. And there's like very specific strategies to like that can help, but like you can't wear earplugs in the dental chair because
No.
the sound, it doesn't block the sound. If anything, that will probably
No.
make the bone conduction noise seem louder because now you're not hearing anything else. But we don't really often think about like, well, what happens when the dentist is having tinnitus
Yeah.
and they're having to be around these tools all the time? And I would suspect that it's probably a lot more common than people realize. I know personally, I've worked with a handful of dentists, a lot of dental hygienists. But in this environment, you're working with extremely kind of pitchy, noisy tools. And I know you have this responsibility to your patients and you have to show up for work. So what was work like in those early days? How were you getting through that? And how much worse
Yeah.
would you feel when it was over?
Yeah, that was a struggle. I tried wearing earplugs, but again, then it was just in my head, and it was so
Yeah.
intense that it was unbearable. I think the hardest part was that I wasn't sleeping.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just got through it, to be honest, but it wasn't easy. I There were a lot of tears, and it was exhausting. So,
Yeah. It's one of
yeah,
those situations where it's like in a perfect world, maybe you would have just stopped working for a little while, but like
right,
sometimes you just have to show up and for the people that you're there for, right? Like you have to meet your responsibilities and it can be really difficult to do that in the middle of a problem like this, but it's admirable that you were able to be there for your patients even though like internally it was like barely keeping it together.
right.
The other thing worth mentioning too before we get into like how things progressed and where you are now is that as a result of all of this anxiety, all of this sleep deprivation, all of these sounds, you started to develop a little bit of hyperacusis, sound
Mhm.
sensitivity as well. Perhaps maybe even a little like tinnitus reactivity also, which is a form of sound sensitivity, in my opinion, something I'm going to do a deeper dive on pretty soon. And somewhere, like by estimates I've seen, somewhere about like 40% of tinnitus patients experience sound sensitivity as a result of just having tinnitus. And it's a very similar problem to tinnitus. In the case of
Mhm.
tinnitus, your nervous system is in this state of overreaction and overprotection, where it is reacting to the internal noises you're perceiving as if they are the sound of something threatening and dangerous. In the case of hyperacusis, it is the exact same problem, the same reaction, but the reaction is externally faced. Like your nervous system thinks the sounds in the environment might be dangerous, and you're having this oversized, overprotective reaction in the nervous system towards these external sounds. So it's a very common thing, and I think the fact that you worked in this environment with like these really high-pitched trills and noises and grinds, like grinding sounds, like this probably aggravated that a lot. But I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about what the sound sensitivity was like, because
Mhm.
in your case, Ellen, you experienced something that I try to like explain to people. Oftentimes, though, it's hard to it's often hard for people to wrap their head around this because in your case, we didn't really have to do anything specific to help you with the sound sensitivity. It just resolved as we calmed your nervous system down and habituation
Totally.
occurred. And that is very often the case. Like when you're dealing with really intense tinnitus, not sleeping, just anxiety through the roof, like all kinds of strange symptoms can arise from sensitivity and weird physical sensations in and around the ear and on the skin and on the scalp. And a lot of times, this is just a byproduct of the nervous system in this just sort of extreme state of sensitivity. And as the nervous system settles back down, it goes away. And so I think it's very hopeful to hear that in certain cases, you don't even have to have a protocol to desensitize the sound. We just need to desensitize the nervous system and the sound sensitivity improved. But what was the sound sensitivity like in those early days? Because I remember when we first met, you had this very big family holiday or
Yes,
reunion or holiday that was coming. It was like we were a few weeks out even from this happening
right,
when we had our first session, and you were I think at one point like continuing either canceling or not being part of it, and like we
right.
were talking about how are we going to manage this. So we'll say what happened at the event next, but kind of what was the sensitivity like? I know it was a lot of fear around sound at that point. Can you remember like what it was like back then, the sensitivity?
Well, do you mean like not just the ringing? Like
Yeah,
I
not
would
like
have,
when other sounds like would start to bother you and aggravate you,
right.
like voices and
So
being in
it
noisy
started,
places.
right. It started before we were planning a family reunion. And unfortunately, I was planning it. So I had to be a part of it. And it was pretty involved. Um, but on top of the ringing in my ears, then I also, as you're mentioning, developed where it was everything had like an echo to it, kind of like, um, I don't know really how to describe it. It was like everything was really, really loud. Like even like I remember starting the dishwasher, and it was sounded
Yeah,
like there was a car engine in my head. I mean,
yeah.
everything was, or if someone would drop something on the floor, I could hear that. It was just another symptom that I had on top
Yeah.
of it.
Which made it scary to think about having like a 40-person family reunion, right? Like it
Totally,
all in one place.
I was dreading it instead of looking forward to it. So,
Yeah. So what you've just described there of like kind of everyday ordinary sounds feeling very
mhm,
loud is sort of like the classic description of hyperacusis, right?
right,
But things progressed very rapidly. So
they did.
we implemented this sort of meditation approach to tinnitus
Right.
habituation that is central to my protocol. People that watch my videos have heard me talk about this many times, but for anyone new, the basic premise is that we use I use meditation as the sort of primary exercise to help people habituate. And it's a very simple kind of meditation. It's the type of meditation where you will focus on a single point of concentration. Now, often people will learn to focus on the breath or a mantra, such as in TM, or a part of the body. And this type of meditation is this very simple type of meditation is very good at inducing a very deep state of mental and physical relaxation inside of a person. On some level, it's like the better you get at this mental exercise, the deeper the relaxation you can achieve. But there's nothing special about the breath or magic about a mantra or anything else you might choose to focus on. And so by having people focus on the sound of their tinnitus instead of the breath or a mantra, but still achieving the meditative state of relaxation as the result of doing so, it gives their nervous system this deeply emotionally positive experience of calm and peace and relaxation to start to associate with the sound of the tinnitus. And that simply can't happen naturally. Now, it doesn't magically erase all of the negative conditioning and the suffering that wraps up around the tinnitus, but it engages neuroplasticity in a very powerful way. We, Ellen, implemented all kinds of tools and technologies to make this more effective. So we were using my brainwave entrainment guided
Mhm,
meditations, which are just inherently very sedating. Just listening to the tracks like makes
mhm,
you feel relaxed and sedated. And there's these guided meditations with masking noises.
mhm,
And you took to this very quickly.
mhm.
I remember even just in the first week, you told me that the meditations were going well. You weren't
Hmm.
getting any sort of like weird effects. You were feeling calm right away.
Right.
And that combined with kind of some early medication intervention to stabilize your sleep, as well as some other
Hmm.
kind of sleep-based kind of effort and tools, you started to experience a really dramatic initial turnaround, and
Hmm.
it still took a few months to get you over the finish line, but the
Hmm.
big victory was that the holidays came and went, and
Hmm.
you did not have really maybe like a few isolated moments, but it went off without a hitch. Like you had, I think you told me like 12 or 14 people or something like that staying in your
Hmm.
house. So you had this
Hmm.
house like jammed full of people, constant noise, constant distraction.
Hmm.
And, had this happened 3 weeks earlier, that could have been a very nightmarish
Hmm.
situation. But just having made it didn't like we just needed to get you a little bit further along to where the sound sensitivity had dropped a bit, the calm and the nervous system had started to develop so that all this activity and noise could be a distraction rather
Hmm.
than something that exacerbated the problem. And so the holidays came and went, and the sensitivity, like once you got through that, I think the sensitivity was probably pretty much gone at that
It
point.
was.
Like, or at the very least, you weren't worried about it at all anymore. Like having been able to
No.
do that, it was like the last thing on your mind.
Right.
And a big change had happened. Like I remember I wrote like on our session in my session notes that day, like so much better overall, and not a single spike while everyone was over. Some
Yeah.
afterwards, but none during, which was like a gigantic
Yeah.
victory. So I'm sure that felt really good to like it was. I always tell people like, because a lot of times I'll be working with someone and they'll have like a family trip planned, or there's some big activity that they want to do and they're really worried about it and thinking about modifying or withdrawing or canceling. And I always say, like, if you don't need to be completely better to be able to do activities like this,
Hmm.
like, oftentimes you just need, if you can just make a little bit of progress, being in like a fun place with surrounded by the people you love, especially if you're on a trip in like some beautiful place, like, oftentimes if you've made enough, just a little bit of progress, these moments that you're dreading because you think it might go terribly can become like the first real glimpse that, okay, like the old me is here. Like,
Right.
life can be just as good as I remember with the tinnitus, right? So I think you got that first glimpse. Is there anything that stands out from
Well,
that
I
time with
think
the holidays?
what was important maybe is that even though I had all those people, you have to take time for yourself. You have to take
Of
time to carve
course.
in to do the meditations.
Yes.
Even with all those people here, I would still start my day by doing to listening to the deep rains and to do the meditations. And those were really helpful tools during that time that was the worst. So
Yeah, it will give you that reset during the
mhm.
day, oftentimes.
You just
Um,
you have to make it work. I mean, you have to put the time into it to make it work. So.
yeah, for sure, for sure. And then I was looking back through my notes, like from there, things really progressed very quickly. Uh, Work started to really improve after
Right.
that. That came next. I know there was like
Mhm.
a few random spikes at work around the holidays and maybe a little afterwards. But by the end of January, work was pretty stable, pretty good. You told me you had not had nearly as many spikes. You told me that you didn't need to wear the maskers at all. Like, you're at the point where you could just be doing things and you didn't even need masking anymore. Um, I think in a whole week, you said you wore them for like 15 minutes total.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
the meditations were progressing well. And then by the end of February,
Mhm.
things were pretty much back to normal.
Mhm.
And the biggest win, as far as I was concerned, like the thing that happened that I knew, like you had done it, was that you got really sick for like 10 days and nothing
Mhm.
happened. Like,
Mhm.
the fact that you were so sick and had no issue with the tinnitus at all.
Mhm.
I always tell people, like, ever since I had Meniere's disease, every illness was like, for a long time, was like the worst illness I ever had,
Mhm.
because it just activated all my symptoms, right? Like,
Mhm.
even now, like, if I have a cold or a flu or anything, like, my
Mhm.
tinnitus, it doesn't bother me, but it will get louder. My I get, just it just
Right.
Have always been worse since I developed Meniere's and tinnitus. But the fact that you went through that period just
Hmm.
completely fine, like I knew that you had succeeded. And all in all, the whole process was it was our first session was on December 8th, and we were done on February 20th. So you made
Hmm.
phenomenal progress.
Hmm.
And life, how is life now? It sounds like
It's
everything just
good.
went back to normal.
Yeah, everything's back to normal. I mean, it's still in the background. I can, it never goes away completely, but it's tolerable, and it's not that the intensity is never there anymore. I don't
That's
hear.
actually good that you mentioned that because this is something I really am trying to emphasize more and more, which is that like what when I first meet people and first start to work with them, it's like people have this idea in their head and it's like I don't understand what you're saying, Glenn. Like there's no way like this is so much louder than you can possibly imagine.
Mhm.
There's no way that like somehow I'll just be okay with this somehow.
Mhm.
Somehow my brain will just be able to let this level of intensity go. And what I always tell people is like that's you're thinking about this the wrong way. Like once the nervous system is settled, it's not going to sound like this. It's not
Mhm.
like somehow one day your brain is just going to somehow find this tolerable. It changes. It
Mhm.
changes dramatically. Like if we compare what it was like, when the first day we met for your consultation to
Mhm.
it's dramatic
Mhm.
difference in
Huge.
volume. Like it calmed way down. And yes,
Right.
habituation doesn't typically make it go away.
No.
But if you're not aware of it anymore, you're not thinking about it anymore, and it's just sort of in the background of your mind, you can hear it, but you don't
Mhm.
hear it the vast majority of the time. And then if
Mhm.
you do hear it, nothing really happens. You can just bounce
Mhm.
off of it and go back to your day as if you heard, the sound of an airplane flying overhead or,
Right.
like one of the, your friend, or your coworker talking in the other
Mhm.
room. Like you notice the noise and then your brain just bounces off of it because there's
Right.
nothing about that noise that requires your attention. The filters just kick on automatically. Habituation isn't about like learning a skill that you didn't have before that now you can do this conscious skill and do this thing so you feel better. Habituation is the mental process by which the brain filters out all sensory perceptions that don't matter and are unnecessary for survival. And I heard a remarkable statistic recently that the brain is filtering out 97% of all available sensory input all the time. Like we are only ever aware of 3% of what we
Hmm.
could be aware of in any moment, right? And so your brain is just filtering out 97% of everything automatically all the time. And it's fully capable of doing this with the sound of tinnitus, with any symptom, really. But the problem is that like there are just obstacles that prevent this filter from filtering out the tinnitus. And once you remove those obstacles, the filters were never broken. Even during the time of your tinnitus, where it was bothersome, you were still filtering everything else out, right? It's not like your brain suddenly was overloaded with all sensory input. It's just there are specific obstacles that prevent this, where your nervous system is reacting as if it's threatening, and you can't ignore the sound of something potentially life-threatening, right? So, but once you resolve those obstacles, the filters just filter that sound out of your conscious awareness the vast majority of the time. So, Ellen, thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing your story today.
Thanks.
It's been an honor to work with you. I know people are going to find this really inspirational and hopeful. That's all for us for today. Thank you for watching, everybody, and I will see you next time.